Hey everyone, whether you want to call it a corporatocracy, corporatism, or cronyism, the very fact that corporations, and hey, I'll add before I even get into this article, is a corporation, and you don't have to go by what I'm saying, just go by the defined meaning of what a corporation is, and you'll come to understand that yes, a corporation is a legal fiction created by an act of legislation. So, in the absence of a government created piece of legislation, corporations cease to exist. They're just called businesses, companies, stores, or service providers. So, once again, to reiterate, make sure that no one is confused at this point. A corporation is a legal fiction, a legal entity created by an act of legislation. And an act of legislation is derived from government. So as much as people try to point to corporations and say these are bad actors, well, first and foremost, you must understand that corporations never existed until government created that legal fiction. And when I hear reports such as this one out of CTV News in regards to the corporate world in this country, in terms of what they're willing to do to lobby their political masters to keep the suppression and the stagnation of the wages of hardworking Canadians in this country, yeah, you better believe it disturbs me tremendously. I mean, as if it's not bad enough that you already have those who are the representation of the monopoly of force or violence, which are those who represent government. That's bad enough all on its own. The fact that you have people that have this so-called authority to dictate, control, and micromanage every aspect of your social and economic life. But on the flip side of that, another devastating consequence of big government and corporations coming together is the fact that they can now use their combined powers, both in terms of social and economic policy and gainful employment, and how the people are compensated for their hard work, labors, and efforts. Well, when they're coming together in such a fashion such as this, you know very well that the employee is at a severe disadvantage when trying to challenge these behemoths or stand up and fight for proper compensation for their hard works and effort. Headline out of CTV News: Don't make election about immigration, corporate candidate tells political leaders. It's being reported by Andy Blanchford, the Associated Press, April 26, 2019. Ottawa: Big business leaders worried about Canada's aging demographics have been urging political parties to avoid inflaming the immigration debate ahead of this fall's federal election. The head of the lobby group representing chief executives of Canada's largest corporations said he's already raised the issue with political leaders who are shifting into campaign mode for the October vote. With signs of public concern about immigration, Business Council of Canada President and CEO Goldie Hyder said he's promoted the economic case in favor of opening the country's doors to more people. We are 10 years away from a true demographic pressure point, Hyder said during a meeting with reporters Thursday in Ottawa. What I've said to the leaders of the political parties on the issue is, please do all you can to resist making this election about immigration. That's as bluntly as I can say it to them. Well, let me say something to you, Goldie. As you should understand, and if you don't, well, maybe you should get up to speed. But yeah, not only is there a demographic shift out in this country, we also recognize and acknowledge that there's definitely a technological shift that's also taken place. And some of the reports that have come out subsequent to this knowledge coming to light is the very real fact that up to 40% of jobs in our countries might be taken over by robots or automation at some point in time. And not far off into the future, but over the next 10 or 20 years. So why do you feel that you need to bring in a mass influx of immigrants in this country to fill these positions when you know that, first of all, there's already a large, substantial portion of the Canadian population, 30+%, so millions of Canadians that aren't even actively participating in the labor force participation rate or in the workforce. So there's that. Then, once again, there's the very real fact that even those who are currently working who would like to step up into a higher position or a higher paid position, well, they're seeing less and less of those even openly available to them because of the wage stagnation that is a consequence of a lot of these immigration policies or the temporary foreign worker programs that, like I said, and this is another statistical fact that's been reported by many of those in the media, which is Wages have been stagnant in this country for 4+ decades. The working class in this country have been seeing a constant erosion of their purchasing power or the value of their labor over the last 4 decades. Stagnation is one thing, but you're also seeing an actual decline of people's purchasing power. Other than what? Some cheap Chinese goods that we can buy to throw in our closet and never look at again. But the staples, the things that people need, the roof over their head, the food in their belly, the fuel in their car, the natural gas bills to heat their homes, all of those things, the staples, like I say, that people require just to sustain their family and their livable standards, those are all rampantly being increased as far as inflation rates. So people are seeing a massive erosion of their purchasing power. And the employees in this country, the wage earners, the backbone, the blue collar folks, they're already suffering enough as it is. So to suggest that you need to bring in a mass influx of immigrants from emerging or third world countries that are going to continue and maintain that wage stagnation or that wage suppression for the domestic Canadians, the ones who have to compete for those limited jobs, those limited economic opportunities and positions, it's a detriment to them. And pretending otherwise, well, it's basically to suggest that you're willing to close your eyes and pretend that none of that actually exists so that you can carry favor for the corporate world. And once again, the fact that this guy is the CEO of the Business Council of Canada, yeah, you know who butters his bread, and you also know who he carries favor for. The message from corporate Canada comes at a time when public and political debate has focused on immigration, refugees, and border security, to the point it could emerge as a key election issue, tempting parties fighting hard for votes. A poll released this month by Ecos Research Associates suggested that the share of people who think there are too many visible minorities in Canada is up significantly. Even though overall opposition to immigration has been largely unchanged in recent years and remains lower than it was in the 1990s. Canada has been ratcheting up its immigration numbers and it plans to welcome more. The Immigration Department set targets of bringing in nearly 331,000 newcomers this year, 341,000 in 2020 and 350,000 in 2021, according to its 2018 report to Parliament. As the baby boomer generation ages, experts say Canada, like other Western countries, will need a steady influx of workers to fill jobs and to fund social programs like public health care through taxes. So no, in reality, it's the ending portion of that sentence is actually what they're really predominantly concerned with. Because as far as filling these labor shortages, like I say, whether it's through automation, robots, or advancements in technology, like I say, it's already a direct threat to a lot of these jobs that they're seemingly concerned with. Now, at the end of the day, what you're really hearing is when the boomers go into retirement, unless the government can find a way to tax them at a high enough rate to pay for the unfunded liabilities and entitlements promised to the boomer generation, what that really represents is like they know that the subsequent generations or the successive generations aren't going to be able to pay for the gold-plated pension plans promised to the boomers. So what they really need is all these immigrants to make up and compensate for that glaring divide. The younger generations, we're all having to struggle and suffer under conditions that the boomers never, ever, ever had to deal with. For the boomers, from the time they entered into the workforce until today, everything has been on a positive and upward trajectory for them. But for successive generations, like I say, it's been wage stagnation, temporary jobs, having to move all over the country, maybe have to take on multiple jobs, and just fighting to stay above water. So once again, and this Hyde character very much looks like he's probably from the boomer demographic and is a representation of that cohort. So once again, not only is he a corporatist, but he's a boomer corporatist at that. I mean, they're even admitting right here that they just want to bring in these temporary foreign workers or these immigrants to be good little tax slaves and chattel for the boomer cohort. And if you're one of those new immigrants or those recent immigrants, yeah, this should disturb you as well. Thanks to the stronger economy, Canadian companies have already been dealing with labor shortages. Healthy employment growth has tightened job markets, making it more difficult for firms to find workers. Oh, really? Well, where's the massive ramp up an increase in people's wages, right? If they're having a hard time finding people, then where is the increased wage compensation that's a direct reflection of when companies are desperate in need of workers? Because that's really how you get those workers, is to bid up their wages. Are you seeing that? No. So once again, this isn't an actual reflection of reality. Every job that sits empty is a person not paying taxes. Think about that. This is someone from the corporate world. These are people, like I say, that would normally be trying to escape or get out from under having to pay high tax rates. These are the corporatists that have a lot of their money stashed in these offshore tax havens and accounts. But yet they're saying that if there's not an employee filling a position, well, that's a lower tax revenue for the government. Well, why would a person that's a representation or a representative of corporate Canada be worried about filling up government coffers with the plundered productivity, wealth, and income of hardworking Canadians? Like I say, folks, this is the kind of people you have now that represent big corporations in Canada. Basically, big government and big corporations today there's not much difference between them, and there's not enough space between them to stick a sheet of paper. We have job shortages across the country, and they're just not at the high end, said Hyder. So once again, those low-paying jobs that, once again, are the ones that are actually directly threatened by modern advancements in technology, automation, and robots. Government constantly plunders the productive income of those in the corporate world, and once again, rather than fight or stand against government, they're siding with government and just passing that off to that one portion of the Canadian population that don't seemingly have a proper representation or a proper voice or ability to push back against them, namely the employees, the workforce, the backbone of this country, said Hyder, who added his members are well aware that immigration has become a tricky political issue. We're worried about that in the sense that the public can very easily go to a xenophobic place. Hyder also brought up Quebec Premier François Legault's election promise last year to cut annual immigration levels in his province by 20%. Legault won the election after making the vow, even though Quebec faces significant demographic challenges. Earlier this week, the Bank of Canada noted the economic importance of immigration in its monetary policy report. Carolyn Wilkins, the central bank's senior deputy governor, said without immigration, Canada's labour force would cease adding workers within 5 years. So even the Bank of Canada. So think about this, folks. You got those who represent government, and you're hearing them out there. The Conservatives are all about economic immigration, and the Liberals and the NDP. I'm not hearing anyone in any of the parties pushing back against mass immigration or economic immigration. So all the three established parties. Then you got the people that represent the corporate world in this country, as well as the central bank and those who represent that as well. So basically, like I'd say, all the people that have all the power and all the mechanisms to micromanage, dictate, and control every area of our economic lives, and how that plays out and how that unfolds, they're all coming together to bully and stand in opposition to the hardworking Canadians who, like I say, have seen their wages stagnant for at least 4 decades now and are basically modern-day indentured servants to a ruling class. The fact we've got people that are buying things, that are using services, that are going to stores that need houses, well, that creates a little bit of a boost to the economy, Wilkins told a news conference in Ottawa when asked about the subject. Certainly, immigration is a big part of the story in terms of potential growth, which will feed itself into actual growth. That's another thing. Economic growth, that doesn't have to happen. That's the thing. Going through a protracted period of recession isn't a bad thing. The only way it's a bad thing if you're one of those people that are playing this Ponzi scheme, these pyramid schemes that constantly needs an ever-increasing influx and larger amounts of people that are entering into that particular scheme. Because once again, the people at the top, that's how a Ponzi scheme works. They need more and more people to offload the cost onto. That's the truth. That's reality. Hyder said he's personally part of a group called the Century Initiative, which would like to see Canada, a country of about 37 million, grow to 100 million people by 2100. The group was co-founded by Hyder and several others, including 2 members of the Trudeau government's influential Economic Advisory Council. Dominic Barton, global managing director of consulting firm McKinsey & Co. And Mark Wiseman, a senior managing director for investment management giant BlackRock Inc. Hyder was a business consultant before joining the Business Council and was once a top aide for federal progressive conservative leader Joe Clark. So basically, as I alluded to already, is they would support the federal liberals or the conservatives because basically they're two wings of the same bird. And these people are a representation of those two wings, and they've come together to pick on the Canadian worker. The Century Initiative wants Canada to responsibly expand its population as a way to help drive its economic potential. Demographics are not going to be relying on just making babies. We're going to need immigration, Hyder said. We have to be able to communicate that from an economic perspective, but cognizant of the social concerns that people have. So once again, folks, what more do I have to say? I don't think I really have to say much more, so I'm probably just going to tie up this video because, I mean, hello. It's all been said right here in this article. This is what we are up against, folks, and that's why I keep trying to point it in so many different ways and so many different videos, why it's so important for the Canadian people to put aside their petty differences and come together in opposition to this stuff. And the only place and the only way we're going to get out from underneath of it, at this particular point, the only political solution at this point in time that's even remotely viable is Maxime Bernier and the PPC. And yes, I know that they have the number of 250,000, and they do talk about bringing in economic migrants, but I've already reached out to them, and I've heard back as a consequence of that, and Maxime is saying that he's more than willing to negotiate those numbers down even further to better reflect the economic needs of not just the corporation in this country, but of the millions of people that work for those corporations. And if you watch this video, Maxime, keep this at the forefront of your mind. It's not just big corporations that you got to cater to. It's the millions of hardworking Canadians who'd like to see a raise after all these decades and start to finally see some genuine economic viability, prosperity, and their ability to go ahead of inflation rates. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.